Camera flashes illuminated Clint Eastwood's weathered face as he moved down the red carpet. December 9th, 2008. Warner Brothers Studios, Burbank. The Gran Torino premiere. 500 reporters shouting questions. Clint was mid-answer with Entertainment Tonight, talking about redemption, when he stopped. Not a pause. A full stop. Mid-sentence. His eyes fixed on something beyond the interviewer's shoulder. Beyond the lights, beyond the chaos. The interviewer kept talking, unaware. But Clint Eastwood, 78 years old and done with pretending, turned away from 500 reporters and walked in the opposite direction. Security guards froze. Warner Brothers executives reached for their headsets. Steven Spielberg leaned forward. Because Clint didn't just walk away from interviews. He was professional. But something in the back corner, behind the barriers, had grabbed hold of something he usually kept protected. A wheelchair. In that wheelchair, barely visible through bodies, a man in a faded military uniform, his shoulders shaking, his daughter beside him with tears running down her face. Clint didn't ask permission. He simply moved. Past confused reporters, past metal barriers, past the architecture that separated important people from invisible ones. What happened in the next 8 minutes would change everything. But to understand why, you need to know who was sitting in that wheelchair. Robert "Bobby" Chen was 93 years old. His military ID read, Staff Sergeant, 82nd Airborne Division, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Normandy, Market Garden, Battle of the Bulge. He'd come home from Europe in 1945 with a Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and shrapnel in his spine doctors said would kill him within 5 years. That was 63 years ago. The shrapnel was still there. So was Bobby. The wheelchair came from age, from a body that survived jump school in German 80s, but couldn't survive time. He'd been using it for 8 years, living in a veteran's home in North Hollywood. His daughter Grace Chen was 57, a high school teacher in Pasadena. She visited every Sunday, brought groceries he barely touched, tried to get him to talk about anything other than the war. Bobby Chen didn't talk about the war. He watched it. In movies. Clint Eastwood movies. The ones about soldiers and sacrifice. Gran Torino wasn't about World War II. It was about Korea. But Bobby didn't care. He cared about Walt Kowalski's eyes. The way they looked haunted. Bobby knew those eyes. Grace had saved 4 months to rent a wheelchair-accessible van and 2 premiere tickets. Not inside tickets. Those were invitation only. But standing room tickets behind the barriers. A chance to see Clint. Just once. They'd arrived at 2 in the afternoon for an 8 p.m. premiere. The security guard's name tag read, Martinez. Young, maybe 25. Sir, this area is for credentialed press only. Grace looked at her father. Bobby's jaw was set in that way that meant he'd jumped into Nazi-occupied France and wasn't about to be turned away. My father is a veteran, Grace said quietly. 82nd Airborne, World War II. He's 93. We just want to stand here. Martinez looked at Bobby, really looked, saw the uniform, the wheelchair, the patches. 82nd Airborne? Bobby nodded. Martinez's grandfather had been 101st. They jumped into the same war. Stay in the back, Martinez said quietly. Grace's eyes filled. Thank you. They waited 6 hours. Bobby never complained. Not about the cold, not about the crowds, not about the fact he couldn't see anything. Grace stood on her toes trying to give her father something. But Bobby Chen, who had landed behind enemy lines and fought across Europe, couldn't see Clint Eastwood. Not through the wall of people who'd arrived later, but mattered more. He'd survived the war, but he was still invisible. Arrival started at 7:45. Grace heard the crowd surge. Is he here? Bobby asked. Grace stood on her toes, saw silver hair. Yes, Dad, he's here. Bobby tried to lean forward. All he could make out were flashes. Can you see him? Grace held up her phone. All she got was the backs of heads. I'm sorry, Dad. There are too many people. Bobby Chen had been shot at by German snipers, had watched friends die, had spent 63 years living with memories that don't fit in conversation. But sitting 50 feet from the man whose movies had kept him company through decades, unable to see him, that broke something. A single tear ran down Bobby's face. then another. Grace saw them and felt her throat close. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "It's okay, sweetheart." Bobby's voice cracked. "At least we tried." Grace could see her father's shoulders shaking. Bobby Chen was crying, the kind of tears that come from a lifetime of being invisible. What neither knew was that Clint Eastwood was looking directly at them. Clint had been answering a question about redemption. Professional autopilot. Then he saw it. Over the interviewer's shoulder. A wheelchair in the very back. Behind everyone. And in that wheelchair, an old man in uniform. His shoulders shaking. Clint Eastwood had played soldiers in a dozen films. Had directed war movies. Had spent years pretending to understand service. But he'd never served. So when he saw that veteran crying in the back, invisible to everyone, something in Clint's chest grabbed tight. "Excuse me," Clint said to the interviewer. He turned away from the camera. Away from Entertainment Tonight. Away from 500 reporters. And he walked directly toward the man in the wheelchair. The crowd parted. Cameras swiveled. Security moved to intercept. "Let me through," Clint said quietly. He reached the barrier. People realized who was approaching, started shouting, but Clint's focus was entirely on the man in the wheelchair. "Sir," Clint said, "you're a veteran." Not a question, a recognition. Bobby Chen slowly turned his head. When he saw Clint Eastwood standing 3 feet away, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. Clint looked at the metal barrier between them, looked at the absurdity of steel separating him from a man who jumped into Normandy. Then he vaulted over the barrier. 78 years old, in a suit. He vaulted the barrier and knelt beside Bobby's wheelchair. The crowd gasped. Cameras exploded. Warner Brothers executives frantically talked into headsets, but Clint's attention was completely on Bobby. "What's your name?" Clint asked quietly. "Robert," Bobby managed. "Robert Chen, Staff Sergeant, 82nd Airborne, 505th PIR. Clint's eyes went to the patches. The 82nd Airborne insignia, the jump wings, the faded ribbons. "Normandy," Bobby nodded. "Market Garden?" Another nod. Clint put his hand on Bobby's shoulder, the same gesture he'd used in films, but this time it wasn't acting. "Thank you for your service," Clint said. "Truly." Bobby started crying, not quiet tears, deep shaking sobs that came from 63 years of carrying weight nobody asked about. Grace knelt beside her father, her own tears streaming. She'd never seen him cry, not once. "Mr. Eastwood," Grace said, her voice breaking, "you have no idea what this means. Your movies, they're all he has." Clint looked at this daughter who'd saved for months, looked at this veteran who'd given everything and gotten back a wheelchair. And Clint Eastwood made a decision that would cost him nothing and mean everything. "What time does the screening start?" Clint asked, and still kneeling. A Warner Brothers executive named David Webb appeared, panicked. 8 p.m., 15 minutes. "We're delaying it," Clint said. "What?" "We're delaying the start. Robert here is watching this movie, from the front row, and I'm sitting next to him." David Webb knew that tone. "How long?" "As long as it takes," Clint replied. "Also find out where Robert lives, what he needs." David looked at Grace, sobbing, looked at Bobby, staring at Clint. "Yes," David said. What happened next would become one of the most photographed moments in premiere history. Clint personally pushed the wheelchair up the red carpet, past photographers, past reporters, past Morgan Freeman and Spielberg and every celebrity. The Hollywood elite stopped. Some started clapping, then more, then everyone. Grace walked beside her father, unable to believe this was real. When they reached the theater entrance, Clint stopped, turned to face the crowd. "This is Staff Sergeant Robert Chen," Clint said. 82nd Airborne, Normandy, Market Garden, Battle of the Bulge. He's seen things we make movies about. Tonight, he watches from the front row. The premiere audience erupted, not polite applause, standing ovation. Some were crying, and in the background, a woman in a dark dress stood with her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Clint positioned Bobby's wheelchair front row, center section, sat directly beside him. Grace sat on Bobby's other side. The lights dimmed. Gran Torino began. For 2 hours, Clint sat watching a movie he'd directed and starred in. But he wasn't watching the screen. He was watching Bobby's face. Watched him flinch during violence. watched him nod during Walt Kowalski's outbursts, watched him cry during isolation scenes, watched him lean forward during the redemption arc. When Walt Kowalski made his final sacrifice, Bobby Chen wept openly. Grace held his hand. Clint put his hand on Bobby's shoulder and left it there. The credits rolled. The theater erupted. But Bobby wasn't clapping. He was staring at the screen. Clint turned to him. "What did you think?" Bobby looked at Clint with red, swollen eyes. "That was me," he said. "The anger, the loneliness, feeling like I survived the war, but died anyway." He paused. "But the ending gave me something." "What's that?" "Hope," Bobby whispered. "Hope that it's not too late to matter." Clint squeezed Bobby's shoulder. "Robert, you've always mattered. Some of us just needed a reminder." In the row behind them, the woman who'd been crying leaned forward. Her name was Patricia Morrison, a film critic. She'd seen 10,000 movies, but she would later write that she'd never seen anything more powerful than Clint Eastwood holding a veteran's shoulder while he cried. At the after party, Clint pulled David Webb aside. "Find out everything about Robert's situation. Medical care, housing, establish a fund. Quietly, no press. Just make sure he has what he needs." "How much?" "Whatever it takes," Clint replied. "And David? Find out how many other Roberts are out there." Over 3 months, Clint worked with VA organizations quietly. No cameras, just phone calls. Bobby Chen became the first beneficiary of what would become the Kowalski Fund. Clint arranged for Bobby to move from the shared VA facility to a small apartment. Covered medical treatments VA benefits didn't address. Got him a consulting job on a veterans documentary. But most importantly, Clint visited, not with cameras. Just quiet visits where two men who'd both worn uniforms, one real, one pretend, could talk about sacrifice. "You know what I realized?" Clint told David months later. "Walt Kowalski's redemption only matters if real veterans get their own. Making movies about caring is easy. Actually doing it is harder." Bobby Chen lived 7 more years. He reconnected with his estranged son, became a volunteer at a veterans center, told everyone about the night Clint Eastwood reminded him he mattered. When Bobby passed away in 2015, Clint attended the funeral. Didn't make it public, just showed up. Before he left, Clint placed Bobby's 82nd Airborne patch on the casket. Inside was a note. "You always mattered. Pre-CE." The Kowalski Fund has helped over 3,000 veterans in Los Angeles since 2008. It's funded through Gran Torino residuals. The program operates quietly. Just help. In 2016, a plaque was installed at Warner Brothers Studios. It reads, "In memory of SSG Robert Chen, 82nd Airborne, and all veterans who reminded us to look beyond the barriers. December 9th, 2008. The photograph of Clint kneeling beside Bobby's wheelchair hangs in every VA facility in Los Angeles. Not because it's a celebrity photo, because it's a reminder. Grace Chen still teaches in Pasadena. She tells her students about that night every Veterans Day, to remind them that seeing people costs nothing and means everything. Patricia Morrison, the film critic, wrote an essay called "The Performance That Mattered Most." She wrote, "Clint Eastwood has given us 50 years of performances, but the 8 minutes he spent kneeling beside a wheelchair taught me more about humanity than any screenplay." Gran Torino made $270 million worldwide. It's considered one of Clint's finest films. But when asked about his proudest moment, Clint doesn't mention box office. He mentions a premiere that started 40 minutes late because he refused to let another veteran wait in the back. The story reminds us that heroism isn't always about roles we play. Sometimes it's about the moment we stop and start seeing people we've been too busy to notice. Clint Eastwood could have finished his interview, walked into his premiere, enjoyed his celebration. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he saw a veteran crying in a wheelchair, and he made a choice that cost him nothing but time and meant everything. Because that's what real heroes do. They see, they stop, they kneel. The night of December 9th, 2008, 500 reporters were trying to capture Clint's attention, but Clint gave it to the one person who wasn't asking, to the veterans sitting in the back, behind the barriers, where they put people who don't matter. Clint reminded everyone that night that rank and ribbons don't expire, that a man who jumped into Normandy at 20 deserves to be seen at 93. Robert Chen mattered. Clint Eastwood made sure everyone knew it, and 3,000 veterans later, that choice is still mattering. Not because Clint is famous, not because the photographs went viral, not because Hollywood applauded, but because one man stopped, saw another man, and chose to kneel beside his wheelchair instead of walking past. That's the story. Everything else is cameras and lights and noise. But Bobby Chen never forgot. Grace Chen never forgot. The 3,000 veterans who got help never forgot. And neither should we, because invisibility ends the moment someone chooses to see. And on December 9th, 2008, Clint Eastwood chose to see.